All right, so, well, how do you get there? We talked about the issue. We've talked about what has happened. Now I want to talk about really how we got to this. This is what I think is the key. And if there's maybe just one resource that you want to have to begin to spark a conversation with your leadership team, it would be something like this. And that is, if we're not this way, how do we get there? And begin to have that conversation of how do we become an externally focused church. Here's the process that I went through with, and by the way, I've actually done this in 2 churches. When I was I was vice president for church growth and ministerial in Washington, and the whole time I was there, I was mourning the loss of my church. And I'd come in every morning with the rest of the ADCO team, and I just, I'd say, let's go plant a church. Let's do something. You'll get over it. That's what they said. You'll get over it. You'll get over it. Well, I kind of tried for about 3 years. In the last 6 months I was there, I really had a burden for church revitalization. And I, look, as ministerial, my approach was I got to get 100 pastors to be able to do what needs to happen, because almost every church is in need of this, believe it or not. Almost every church, even churches that are not dying, they could be sustaining a lot more growth and achieving what they have. And so I was out there trying to get everybody to do this, and it was just so unfair. I just had this moment where I realized this was the wrong approach, that there are some churches that are so unhealthy, it almost takes an intervention. And so I was coming up really trying to formulate my thinking, and there may be some people that can be very successful in pastoral ministry in going into a healthy church and leading it forward, but just the same way I don't believe everybody can plant a church. I think it takes a unique chemistry to be able to do that. And so I was talking with our leadership team there. I said, let me just get one church that, and so we decided South Tacoma Church. It was at one time a flagship church. It had some great pastors, but over time, because the community had kind of turned and they put up a big fence and barbed wire and all that, they just got sequestered from the community, and it just began to decline into the place where this church that once had, I think it was a host to one of the net meetings. It was a blowing and going concern at one time, but a few years ago, actually about 3 years ago now, it had got down to about 50 people, and it was mainly older folks. And so we began to experiment with this idea, what does it take to revitalize a church? And so I started that process and went in there as kind of just a part-time pastor while I was doing my day job, and we saw within literally 3 months the church turn. And we had so much momentum that before I left, we brought in a pastor to carry that on. And in fact, I was in Taiwan a few months ago now, about a month and a half ago, and I got a text from the new conference president in Washington. He said, "Hey, I just want you to know, South Tacoma has now got 300 people attending. They are planning," and I don't recommend this unless you're a real hardcore church growth person, 5 evangelistic meetings this year, and they are reaping the momentum that they had. And so the process is the same, and it's really this, to number one, understand your biblical purpose, and that's pretty easy to do. You can spend a year or more studying about mission statements and all that, but you don't have to do that. Because you're going to come, if it's going to be a biblical mission statement, you're going to come back to one thing. You're going to circle around the gospel commission. This is what our calling is. And so the bigger thing is, once you acknowledge that is our biblical purpose, are we going to embrace it? Because that's the real question. Are we going to accept that and pursue that, and that is what we're going to do, or are we going to fight it? And so I try to lead people through the process of embracing it. And that means development, mission, and values consistent with that purpose. I see a huge disconnect between a lot of churches who say they're about something, but their actions will tell you it's about something else totally. I mean, you can put a mission statement on the bulletin every week. You can put it on the wall in your foyer. You can do whatever, but if you're not going to live it, it's not going to make any difference at all. And I think that dissidence, that misalignment is often where a lot of church leaders get off track. We have somehow have replaced training and meetings like this as being actually achieving something. And really, this isn't. This isn't about that we have accomplished something this weekend. This is a catalyst to do something more important. You understand what I'm getting at. And so we take these leadership teams through this long, arduous process of developing mission, values, core value, all that, and they somehow think, because we got it now, we did it. But now it's about living it. And so developing our ministry plan to be consistent with that. And that's a tough thing to do, because mission drift is all of what the enemy wants us to do. He doesn't mind us identifying what the mission is as long as we don't go after it. And it's just a little bit, just a little degree here, a little degree there, and pretty soon over the long haul, you're way off in the weeds rather than right down the middle of the road where you want to be. So one of the things that we have to do is when we get clarity about our biblical purpose, we have to align ministry to that. We have to look at everything that we're doing. I love the church, but there are things that we do that drive me crazy. And it's we value activity. We value activity. Whether it was successful or not, if we did it, we feel good about it. It doesn't matter if it was effective, if it was successful. We start stuff and then we just do stuff because we've always done stuff. And we hardly ever step back and say, how is this contributing to what our overall mission was? And some people think that that's a cruel thing to do, but it's good stewardship. We need to do that at every level of our organization. We've got to step back sometime and say, is what we're doing working? We're busy and we're doing a lot of stuff, but if it's not achieving our goal, let's save the resources. And you know what? It's not a sin to stop doing something. As long as it's not working, it's not a sin to do that. In fact, I have the belief that it's okay to close a church. If, in fact, the church has reached a place where the community has moved and it's really not serving that, why can't we bring a ministry to an end and celebrate what has been accomplished and feel good about it rather than just thinking, oh, this is a terrible thing? People die. Churches sometimes die too, but we can celebrate what has happened and move on. So align ministries and resources that are consistent with that call. I've said this and I believe it. Show me your church calendar, show me your checkbook, and I can tell you what you believe in. Where's the money going? Where's your time going? And that will tell me what you value. That will tell me what is really important. It's the same personally. What do you spend your time on, and what do you spend your money on? So don't be afraid to let some things go. And especially if you're trying to help turn a church around, because you can't do everything. Our church model, is not sometimes based in reality. I remember the first time I was asked to serve as a church office, the nominating committee called, and they said, the nominating committee has selected you to do something, and they named off some title. I didn't know what it was. And I asked them, well, what is that? And they said, well, I don't really know. The pastor could do it, but we just need to know if you'll do it. And I said, well, yeah, I'll do it. The nominating committee prayed, and my name came to I didn't know they had 40 other names before me. But I said, yeah, I'll do that. I wanted to do it. And then when I finally talked to the pastor, and I did this with some other stuff, but this one was like a PR person. And in our church, we didn't do anything. We had church secretary, whatever. It was nothing, but it was in the book, and we had to fill it. And so we were a slave to a model that really wasn't, effective. And so I believe in looking at a church, looking at the mission, and developing a structure that fits it. Sometimes structure is a good thing. Our forefathers thought any structure was Babylon. You know that. They were concerned the moment we organized, we were creating Babylon. Well, structure is needed, but ministry has to drive structure. Structure doesn't drive ministry. It's kind of the other thing. I love going into churches and say, what are we doing? What are we doing well? What do we do? What's God putting on our heart? Let's build structure to support that, but let's not focus on stuff we're not passionate about. We don't have the right people and all that simply because it's always been done. And so don't be afraid to let things go. And the reason is you got limited resources, right? You got limited people that are willing to work. Every church has the same problem. A few people willing to do a certain amount, and the more you spread them out, the more diluted they become. And money. We don't have all the money that we want, and so we got to let go. This one's more of a check. Make sure you're trying to grow your church for the right reason. You know, this is about God's kingdom growth. You know that. Not about yours. And I'm in this situation where our church has kind of grown to where it really needs to stop. Well, no, that sounded funny, but in other words, it's grown to the facility, and we could spend a ton of money and build on, but it really wouldn't be sustainable. It's not good stewardship. Not every church has to be 1,000 members. This one, 300, 350, is a good number for them, and it fits the facility, and so now it's time to do something else. And sometimes if our heart's not in the right place, we just want to keep building our kingdom. We want to be a bigger church. We want this and that. And so make sure it's for the right reason. And then once you embrace it, you got to be relentless. Man, I'm just telling you, there are forces out there that will try to drag you. I started a business after I became an advocate. I was a programmer, and you can't be back in the 80s. You couldn't be a programmer and keep the Sabbath. You just couldn't do it. And so I started a business so I could control that. And one of the things that when you start a business, you chase business. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's in your wheelhouse. And it's in times like that I made some of the worst mistakes that I ever made, choices in trying to chase business rather than saying, this is what I do, and I'm going to stay focused on that. And when I did that over those 15 years, God richly blessed me. And so we need to understand there's a term that we use in the church, and I don't know that we really understand what it means, but personal ministry means personal ministry. It doesn't mean ministry that people do in the church. It's personal ministry. It's okay that the church not try to put their arms around everything that happens and just says, no, we're going to do this. But if you have a calling or a burden to do something on your own, we bless you, and you can do that. So stay relentlessly focused on mission, especially because you're going to face headwinds. When you start to do change, I was telling somebody at lunch, the laws of physics apply to church revitalization. Objects at rest want to remain at rest. Friction and all of that, it happens. But also momentum will come into play. So stay committed to it. Commit to an evangelism cycle. I believe that every growing church needs to be out there in some capacity preaching the Adventist message. We are message-driven, and we need reaping events. There's a lot of people that will come. If you're a healthy church, people will walk in off the street. They will. But it's very difficult to do enough Bible studies among all your people to disciple 50 people, if that's what happens. So a reaping meeting is good for them, and a reaping meeting is good for us. It's very faith-affirming. I'm shocked at how many Adventists don't know what we believe, but they've been an Adventist all their life. And it's because we're not hearing it the way that we should, and this gives us an opportunity to do that. So pick your cycle. If it's going to be one meeting a year, everything's going to lead into that. Go for it with gusto. If you want 2, then it's going to be a 6-month cycle. If you're going to do 4, it's going to be a 3-month cycle. Figure out what it is and commit to do it every year. One of the things that we did that first Friday night, we committed to do an evangelistic meeting, and I didn't know what would happen. I had a good idea what would happen is God would bless, and he did. And so the first board meeting that we had after that, I led them to this decision. I said, look, we are about growing God's kingdom. We see that this is what happens. By the way, how many on this board were their first contact was some sort of evangelism? A third of the people raised their hand. To say that that's not how people become a Christian or become part of the Adventist church, it's just not true. We're out there. We're in all kinds of ways. So we committed to do it every year. In other words, we don't vote it anymore. We had a very empowering moment where we said, this is what we're about. We're going to do 2 a year, and the pastor's just going to pick the dates. And we'll publish them once a year, and we'll all get on board. But we're not going to debate the efficacy of having them. That's we just don't do it. We've committed to that cycle. And the church does that all the time. The church worships every week, right? You hold worship services every week. When was the last time you voted in a board to have Sabbath services? There's just certain things that are a given. And so commit to do it every year. There's something empowering about this is who we are. It's in our culture, and we're not even going to debate it. We're just going to plan on it. So we plan our entire calendar around it. I really believe in a holistic approach to evangelism. It's not a 2-3 week event. It is a 6-month event. I equate it to, raising children, and that whole commitment of raising spirit, preparing for parenthood is quite an ordeal, and you plan it. And so you anchor it in your calendar, and you let that drive all of the things that need to happen before and the things that need to happen after. Since you're going to do it every year, you have to make it sustainable. Here's what we told our church. We're doing 4 this year. And when I say 4, that's really a misnomer, because I do a meeting. In fact, I just finished one. Last week. And we start a follow-up the next week. And it is by all definitions a different way of a Bible prophecy seminar, except it's much slower. It's 1 day a week or 2 days a week. I've never understood why pastors, lay people that do evangelism will get to an end of a series and shake somebody's hand and tell them, thanks for coming. That's all I got. You know what? I got more. And as soon as we're done in a meeting, if somebody hasn't made a decision and they're still willing to study, we're going to have. So our church always, every week, has a Bible study, prophecy related, that's very doctrinal, that's going through it. So at any time, people can jump in. But I'm going to continue to study with those interests that have not made a decision, as well as the people who just made a decision. We're going to use a little different material, and they're going to see it in a different way. So you've got to make it sustainable. You've got to make it so it doesn't kill the church. And one of the things that we did this year is we told our church family, we're large enough, don't feel you have to come to every meeting. It's okay. It's not a sin. Pick one meeting. And hopefully they don't all pick the same meeting, because we don't need everybody. We need, 1 or 2 members per guest. And we drive our evangelism to be about 20 to 30, 40 guests. That's all we need. So we only need 50, 60 people in the room, and the rest of the people can be doing their thing. We get it. It's hard. It is hard. Church is becoming more and more Sabbath-centered. Everything happens on that day. And trying to get anybody out for anything else is hard. But evangelism has to be that way, so one time a year is not. So making it sustainable is also making it short. How long should an evangelistic meeting be? Not 1 day longer than necessary to accomplish your purpose. And especially if it's lay-led or pastor-led, and that person's going to be around, and you've built a relationship with them, they're not going to stop coming. And so it's all part of that. So short as possible. For me, really about 17 is what it takes. And I don't baptize people usually right after a meeting. It's rare. It's rare, unless they've attended one before and now they're ready to make that decision. I like to give people 3-4 months. Let them get used to the family. We're a weird family. Some people, and I want to know that they're going to acclimate into church life, that this is really what they want. So as soon as the meeting's over, start another one. Don't believe you have to reap everything in one meeting. I covered. Instead of just doing evangelism, make the church everything the church does evangelistic. This is what I talked about, is evangelizing the ministries of the church. There needs to be that flavor. There needs to be that. Church members, when they hear about a social that's going to happen in 2 weeks in the gym playing volleyball, they shouldn't think, I don't want to play volleyball. That's not what they should be thinking. It's not about you playing volleyball. It's not about you eating an ice cream cone or whatever it is we're doing. It's about you being a part of this ministry that is going to have conversations with different ones, spouses, and all of that. It's a beautiful thing when it happens. And so people need to understand that there's that element to everything that we do. In other words, evangelize the ministries of the church. Vision and optimism are contagious, but somebody has to infect them. What I mean by that, there needs to be a Joshua. There needs to be a Caleb. There needs to be someone that'll stand up, and somebody might say, you know what, we did this in the past and it didn't work. And somebody needs to stand up and say, yeah, but if we don't have it, God can't bless. We need to do something. Maybe this isn't it, but let's try it. And if God blesses, then we'll know it's the right thing. And if not, let's do something else. But there has to be, well, Kidder called it that faith-based optimism. A belief that with what we do, God will do what we cannot do. And He will bless. And so that's so important. In fact, a difference between a dying church and a growing church is attitude. So much of it's attitude. Because they're doing the same stuff. You know that. It's just how they do it is a little bit different. So attitude is very important. So cultivate a holy expectation that God will bless. I love that. Leave room. Leave room. I mean, do something so big that God has to show up. And give Him room. God loves to do the big stuff. And I'm not talking about getting wild, but I am talking about do something beyond what you are able to do and cultivate that. I do that on Sabbath. I do that on Sabbath among our people and among our church family. I really believe every Sabbath God's going to show up. That God's going to do something. God's going to speak to somebody's heart. That somebody's going to make a decision. That some marriage is going to be... when you talk that way among your leaders, it's powerful. I meet with my board every week to pray. We do it by phone, but 30 minutes. Every Tuesday evening, 30 minutes. We're praying together for that week, what's going to happen, what's going to be happening on Sabbath. We're doing that. I'll talk about some of the other stuff. Cultivate this holy expectation. Establish faith-filled goals. I'm a big goal person. I think God is honored by that. I know some people don't like that, but if you don't reach for something bigger than you are, I think that there's, there was a book that was making the circle, and I can't remember, the Circle Maker, that's what it was, making the circle maker. Making the advent of circles, what I was talking about. And it talked about praying with specificity. And I got checked on that because I'm a person who believes in prayer, but some of my prayers were so vague. God bless this and God be with that person, whatever. And you could never, they were so vague that you could never really say, God did that. And I think I robbed God of those moments when I could look back and go, I prayed for something so specific, and God did that it is faith-affirming, it grows our faith, and so we do that. Our goals are like that, and you'll see some of them. We develop and publish detailed prayer initiatives. One of the things that I believe in is leadership teams need to meet apart from the church. When we come together once a month to do a board meeting, the church manual says the purpose of a church board is what? To plan evangelism. That doesn't happen. If you only meet once a month, you're reacting to the stuff that's happening in the church. You're dealing with this issue, you're dealing with that issue, and an effective board meeting can't be much more than a couple hours. You keep them there till 10 o'clock at night, and they're zoned out. They're not engaged. And so you really only have 90 minutes of real good quality time to deal. And if you're chewing all of that up with the minutia of what it takes to do church, you're not really using leaders. And they know that. They know that when they come in. You heard phrase, cut and dried, and it is. But what if you create an opportunity every 6 months where the leadership team, and I like to go outside the church. I like to go even outside the city. If I can put them in a hotel, I would. That's harder to do these days. But we're going to spend Friday, Sabbath, Sunday, and we're going to talk about mission. We're going to talk about where's God leading us? What's our best understanding right now of what is on the horizon for us, and what do we think God is wanting to do? And then what we do, our whole objective in that weekend is to do nothing but to develop a prayer list. And then we bring that prayer list back to the church as our goals. They're our goals, but they're also our prayer initiatives. If we think it's time to start a new ministry, we're going to pray about it first. We're going to have the entire church praying about it. I tell you, there's something very empowering. Prayer changes things, but prayer changes people. And when people know you're praying about something, when it finally happens, and we can say, God has opened the door and this has happened, then you don't get the resistance because it's not really new, even though it is new. They've been hearing about it for a long time. So publish detailed prayer initiatives because people see what they look for. That's kind of a duh thing, but there's a spiritual truth to that. People see what they look for. And if they're looking for God to work, they'll see it. And if they're not looking, they'll miss it. I see it all the time. And so we've got to create that vision of expectation that God is going to be at work. Here's drilling down in that second NCD. This is on the effective structures. Look at question 67. I know the goals that we are working towards. This is a survey of the church members. I know the goals we are working towards. And it's 99. Everybody knows. We're all on the same page. There is a spirit of unity that happens. Every Sabbath, they see that flash up. Whoever's leading us in prayer is mentioning that, and we talk about it every day, as a matter of fact. Here's the next step. Invest in core ministries that will promote growth. You don't have to do everything, but there are some things that you have to do. And for us, this is really where we're at. We really felt that if we would invest in these ministries, we would see significant change. We would see significant change in numerical growth and spiritual growth. We want to grow wide, but we want to grow deep. And if you'll notice, and if you visit the church, you'll see there is a huge emphasis on spiritual disciplines. We believe in the spiritual disciplines. We have a hard time measuring discipleship growth. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can't look at somebody and go, wow, Haskell, you grew 10 points as a disciple this week. You can't. That's why we can't report it to the conference. We can't say, oh, made 3 disciples. But we know what a disciple looks like, and we know what a disciple does. And at the end of the day, there's no shortcuts. Disciples are discipled through the practice of spiritual disciplines. You're not going to get around it. Prayer, Bible study, worship, serving, fellowship with other Christians. That is how disciples have been made for generations. And so we have a big emphasis on that. Fellowship, worship, and children's ministry. So I'll break these down. Worship. I'm not a worship-centered guy, but let me tell you something. If you're not creating a worship experience that can at least engage people to the place where when they leave, they're thinking, I want more of that. It doesn't mean it has to be a huge production or whatever, but it needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be, NCD would say inspiring. And that doesn't mean smoke and mirrors and bombs going off and all of that. Inspiring worship can be done in high church. The truth, there's a piece of me. I'm a Presbyterian. I was born a Presbyterian. My granddaddy was a Presbyterian. There's a piece of me that really resonates with high church. You know what I'm talking about? The liturgical pipe organ. There's something very powerful and moving to me. I like that. But I also, there's other forms of it. So it's not about worship style. It's not about how you do it, but it's just about doing it well, doing it with a spirit of excellence. It's not going to all look the same, But I think that different forms of worship can connect with the same person. You don't all have to, I can be fed in a lot of different types of worship experience. So our worship ministry goals is a desire to lead people in the experience of worship through music, prayer, preaching of God's word. There's elements to that, and we want to make sure that we engage people in that worship experience. It's frustrating as a pastor to know that sometimes that's the only spiritual experience some people have all week. They're not doing it at home. They're not getting it any other way. They walk into the church and they plop down on the pew and they give you 40 minutes, 45 minutes, hour 50, whatever length your service is. And what they're really saying is, make me spiritual. I'm here. And while I don't like that, it's an opportunity. It's evangelism is what it is. That person needs to be converted. That person needs a personal relationship with God. They've got a relationship with the church. Now they need one with the living Savior. We seek to provide safe, non-threatening worship experiences where people truly experience the presence of God. Provide an atmosphere where people, no matter where they are spiritually, will be challenged to take their next step with God. You know who I preach to? I preach to the person that doesn't know Christ. I preach to the person, and this is true as well. I also preach to the person that this may be the last sermon they hear. And if you do that, Adventists they'll find food in that. It will speak to their hearts. But we need to understand this is serious stuff and treat it. Small churches sometimes just put worship on autopilot. And they do no planning. And, you can close your eyes. I'm not saying you got to mix up the order of service. You don't have to do that. But it needs to be done well. People can tell. For those who have not accepted Jesus to lead them to know Him as Savior and Lord. We recognize excellent worship services don't just happen. We're deeply committed to do whatever it takes to provide a quality worship experience every week. Sometimes that's the building. Sometimes that's the environment. Sometimes that's just making sure that we're doing everything that we need to do that. I'll give you a case in point. Church, bless their hearts. The church burned down. Baltimore first burned down, or Ellicott City, Baltimore first burned down. The sanctuary did. And they rebuilt it. And, God can bless through a fire. The new sanctuary is a lot better than the other one was. There was no loss of life, and so they ended up fully insured, and so they ended up with this nice sanctuary. And they did two things that for the life of me, I can't figure out. Because I can see you guys have maybe a similar problem. Maybe it's not a problem for you, but if you start recording and your stream, whatever, putting a skylight in the top of the church, we got a huge one. I mean, a huge one. It's a monster one. It's about 30 feet across by 40 feet right in the center. And as the sun goes behind clouds, it's like church members are looking around who turned off the lights. And and the cameras don't like it. And so that's number one. But here's the other thing they did. They put the baptistry in the middle of the stage. I'm not joking you. The middle of the stage. And it just juts out, literally. Out of the back of the wall, there's a big round baptistry. It's painted green. And you got to understand, people that are not churched, they walk into a church and they don't understand why there's a hot tub on the platform. No, seriously. You have this mindset. You know what it is. But we are seeing an entire generation of people that have never walked in the doors of a church. They know what that looks like, but for the life of them, they can't figure out why there's a hot tub there. And so, we tried to hide it. We're doing things to try to. I don't want somebody sitting there for the first time in a Christian church. In fact, we have some Hindus that have been coming from an apartment complex that we're ministering to. Hopefully, I'll be able to share a little bit about that before we go. We poured all of our outreach on one group of people. Outreach in churches I've always been a part of is like Dorcas, clothes and some food thing, and people come and they call you on the phone. They're about ready to be evicted, and you help people, and that's a good thing. But I said, what if we could just direct it all at the same group of people? So we adopted an apartment complex, 300 units, and everything we have goes into them. Every food basket, every tutoring class, every children's, any social, they're invited. When we rent a skating rink, we'll get 30 or 40 people from that apartment. And so we're building relationship. And there's been some, I think he's a Hindu. He decided to show up at church. You could tell he was so uncomfortable. He couldn't sit down. He kept jumping up. I said, have you ever been to a Christian worship service? No. I said, just relax and enjoy it. And so at the end of the first service, I got up and I walked back there and he goes, oh, I get it. People come and you cheer them up. That was what he thought a Christian worship service was about. People come in depressed and the pastor cheers them up. And so anyway, we want to do whatever we can to do that. It has nothing to do with worship style or music or that. A spirit of excellence is what you want. Swing for the fence. You never know. I've had people that have been in a worship service for the last time, and you begin to replay it. You know, did we do everything that we could have done to do that? They don't just happen. I'm going to go on because I'm going to run out of time. So worship, invest in it, figure it out, what you got to do. Celebrate what God is doing. I love that. I'm very careful about planning worship. Planning, because there can be some real killers that can happen. You can even have testimonies, but they're always interviews, what we do. And I rarely will let a mic get pried out of my hands. Because, you know, it's easy for a testimony, a really powerful story that could be done in 4 minutes, turn into 14, and it's just there. You want to make sure your worship, you're on a journey. You're on a journey. And people are all starting in different places, and they'll come in as you go. But you want to make sure you land where you want to land, and losing control of that can be very difficult. Wow. Look at all that. Prayer. Call the church to prayer. One of the first things that we did is that Friday night, we started 40 days of prayer. We prayed twice a day. We still do. In 3 years I've been there, every morning at 6 o'clock, we have prayer together, about 30 or 35 people. We do it by phone. We can't get them there because of the commuting and all that, but 30 minutes, and we're praying together. We're praying for our initiatives. We're praying for the church. We're praying for people. It's been powerful. We've done that every morning now for at least 2 of the 3 years that we've been there, and God has worked in that process. It's been very powerful. Churches are not restored naturally, but supernaturally. In fact, one of the first initiatives we had is we were going to pray for unity. They said, Pastor, this church, we've been fighting and bickering. There's a spirit of disunity. How can we ever see anything happen? I said, we're going to pray for unity. And we prayed morning and night. The special seasons of prayer, we do it twice a day, 9 p.m., 6 a.m. And we're praying for unity. And finally, at about 30 days, I said to the group, we're going to stop asking, and we're just going to start thinking. Because it was so clear that it had happened. And from that moment on, there's never been any dissension. There's never been anything. Because I felt like continuing to pray for it, it just keeps bringing it up. I said, we're gonna pray in faith that God has answered this, and we saw evidence that he did, and so we've moved on. Real growth is a result of God's blessings. But just make prayer central. This is our prayer room right across from the office. You want to know what faith looks like? That's faith. When somebody walks in and will write, I need God to save my marriage. I need God to intervene in my kid. We've got, a whole wall of requests, and we'll have people slip in there and pray, and it's open all week long. Anytime the office is open, people are welcome to go. We gather at 8:30 every Sabbath morning, and it's 20, 25 people will come, and we'll spend that time praying for the service that day, praying for lost people. We know there have been some people that our members have invited, and even might have even said, yes, I'll come. But we know Saturday morning is going to be a battle, and we're praying. We're specifically praying that God will intervene. There's our prayer initiatives for this past year. God will bless our efforts to lead 50 souls. We only got about 30-something. Freedom through faith. We didn't have a mortgage problem. We don't have financial problems. God is really blessed. But we have about a $300K mortgage, and I thought, let's do something faith. So what we said is because we want to model for church people, disciples, what it means to be, what it means to walk with God by faith. And we said, what if we just prayed that if God, I'll make a pledge, however much, $5,000, if God gives me extra income, extra money. We called it miracle money. Not a raise, not you worked harder, but truly some other source. And if God does that in that next year, would you commit to give that to help reduce our mortgage? We didn't care about our mortgage. We wanted them to see that God would do a miracle. And then we were sharing testimonies. We got a book of remembrance of miracles that God has done in relationship to that. We didn't get 100. We got 99 point something. But that's God has a sense of humor, I think. Well, we'll be able to start a Pathfinder Adventure Club. We prayed for that, and we have one now. We launched our Adventures and Pathfinders with 70 kids. I mean, that's how big it was when it got started. We'll be able to launch a young adult ministry. We're doing that March 1. God has answered that prayer. And we get to, you get to call, like if it was Rick and Cindy, call them up. God's laid it on their heart. We've been praying for a year, and we bless them as a church, and all the church family sees God answering prayers. We'll develop plans for a church-wide mission trip. We're going to Brazil in June. 30 people from our church going to help do that. We pray in our services. This lady I just baptized, she was diagnosed with stage 3 or whatever, serious cancer. And we prayed for, and we anointed her in our services. We do a lot of that in the services. People say, wow, you're taking a risk. What if God doesn't do anything? And, that's a terrible attitude to have. We leave it to the Lord to decide, and you know what? We got to come back. She didn't have any hair, but the doctor said she was, I'm going to turn this off. I think we went dead. She was cancer-free, and so we celebrated again during our church family. See that hot tub back there? Right there. We pray when people make decisions, when people go off as missionaries to Pennsylvania. That's Gary Gibbs who took that. Welcome ministry. Let me hit on this one in this time. This I've never understood. We do this really well during evangelistic meetings. You know what? We know guests are coming, and we're gearing up. We're going to roll out the red carpet for people that are going to come to our church for the first time. But what about the people that come on Sabbath morning for the first time? I mean, they are a much greater interest. They're there on the right day. And all you've got to do is engage them. And so our goals is to ensure that people attend our church are made to feel welcome. We don't want to greet people. We want them to feel welcome. Create an outstanding first impression for every first-time guest. Foster a feeling of anticipation. We do that from the very beginning. We want people that have never even worshiped to get the sense that we're thinking God's going to show up and do something. And so we want them to do that. The 15-minute clock, we're very cognizant of this. Every study tells you 15 minutes. You get 15 minutes from the time they pull into the parking lot. They've already judged you. They've already made some assessments. And so we're doing everything we can to inject what we want in that 15-minute. We sat down, and it just seems logical to me. We start with people walking to their car and driving away. If they visited our church, we're thinking about that moment. When they're driving away after worshiping with us, what do we want them to be thinking? What do we want them to be feeling? What do we want them to be able to say? Wow, whether it's been an hour or 2 hours or whatever, what do we want that experience to be? And we back up, and we start from the first encounter, which may very well be the website. So the stakes are high. It's unfair. People are going to give you that one chance to do that. So every morning is an evangelistic meeting for us, and we treat it like one. We've got our best greeters out there. We're doing everything that we can to welcome people, engage people, and we plan for visitors. We just believe that. We start in the parking lot, and that's our parking ministry team. They're out there. Rain, snow, cold, not the kind of weather you got here. We're talking about, sub-zero weather. They're out there greeting people in the parking lot. And so we create that experience before they hit the door. The right people in the right places. I tell you, when I got there,
You know, I had to cringe and think, what was the nominating committee thinking? Because, you know, here's what the nominating committee sometimes does, is they think anybody can greet. I've heard that. I've been in part of one. Oh, anybody can greet. Mm-hmm. No. In fact, there's very few people that have the gift of hospitality, the gift of making people feel welcome. Anybody can dispense a bulletin, but if that's all you're after, why are you settling for so much less? You ought to have your best people at the front door and do everything you can to preserve that, and we do that. By the way, we don't vote our greeters. Nominating committee doesn't touch them. You know, there are certain things that we've said these are too important for them to people that may not be engaged in understanding everything about what we're trying to accomplish. So they're handpicked. Even our bulletin isn't really just about a bulletin. We don't care about what's just going to happen that day. You're already there. We want you to take something with you that is going to challenge you, engage you in the rest of church life. So we've got a huge bulletin. It's 11 by 17, two-sided, full with, I've agreed nothing less than 9-point type for the people, but it's got a ton of stuff on it to engage people in our church. So we do exit greeting. You'll notice we do name tags in our church. Everybody wears a name tag. We've got not a huge church, but there's a lot of people who don't know who people are, and if you have guests, everybody wears a name tag. In fact, I think I have a picture. This is just an event where I think we've got some baptisms going on there. Look at all those name tags. And look right there. There's a name tag on me. I wear a name tag just like everybody else. And so you know what it's like. You've gone to church. You know that guy that sits on the pew, one behind you, says hi to you all the time? You don't have a clue what his name is. And it's too late to ask. You know what I'm saying? You kind of pass that moment when you can't ask anymore and you can only use so many pronouns. So, yeah, our dear brother, for that, if somebody calls me dear brother, dear sister, you forgot my name, didn't you? So it's that we have kiosks that will do that for it. But it not only does that, it attracts attendance. We believe, was that 5 minutes ago? 5 minutes now, okay. We believe that you keep track of what you value. We count people. We want to know who's there. We want to know who's not there. We want to know who hasn't been there in a while that's come back. We want to know who's come 2 times in a row, who's come 3 times in a row. We want to know all that, and our system allows us to do that. And before I ever walk into the fellowship hall and mingle with people, I know how many people were in the building, who came back, who's here for the second time, and I'm thinking about those. I go through the decisions, and I get all of that. You got to be very intentional about it. It's just common sense. But we also send miss you cards to people who miss church. If you are a member of our church and you haven't been to church in a year, every week you're going to get a card. Every Thursday you're going to get a custom design card for that week telling you what you missed. If you don't come to our church for 3 years, you're going to have one every week. Some people will come back just to stop getting the cards. Yeah. A welcome center. We want to go beyond greeting to really creating that welcome experience. So we have a guest services person, and their whole job, and they have a couple of them there every Sabbath, their whole job is to interact with first-time visitors. Jackie was one of those. And their whole job is not to greet people or whatever, it's just to connect with those people that are there for the first time. And whatever that might be, if it's a tour, if it's talking about what's going to happen, Adventists are different than non-Adventists, but we want to make sure that we have that. So we treat them as if we were waiting for them to show up. Guest bags, yeah, we do everything we can to get their names. We bribe them with stuff. With this connection card, we'll give you, what do we give you? If you give me a name or a phone number, I'll give you one of those. An email address, you'd be surprised what people would trade away their email for. A little mug of chocolate, yeah, because we want to engage them. when they come in, they get a name tag. All we get is a first name sometimes. And so Rodney comes in, we key Rodney. And then we'll usually try to have somebody get his last name without him knowing, so that he's in our system. Next time he comes in, he can go right to the kiosk and get that. But guest services, welcome ministry, here, I didn't get through everything, but there are some core ministries. There are core ministries you have to deal with. And it is worship, it is what you do at the front door, and it is what you do with the children. If you will invest in those areas and put a prayer cover over all of that, God will bless your efforts. You cannot grow a church without children's ministries. You can't grow a church if you're not engaging people in worship. And, there's a lot of other things that you can add, but start with those core things, and God will do great things. God will do great things. If you want to know the rest of this, come visit 9:30, 11 o'clock in Ellicott City. We'd love to have you.